The views and opinions expressed on the following program are those of the host and guests and do not necessarily represent those of any organization, including One Generation Away.
The freedom of a people to choose its leaders is the root of liberty.
Keep alive this experiment in liberty.
Liberty, in case you've forgotten, is the soul's right to breathe.
Government should be very minimal in protecting liberty.
Peace cannot be purchased at the cost of liberty.
The sturdy ground of liberty.
Liberty once lost is lost forever.
Fight for their liberty and for our security.
Guarantees individual liberty.
This great republic, born alone in liberty.
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 Just how much do you want liberty?
This is Liberty Nation with Tim Donner,
a production of LibertyNation.com.
cutting through the double talk, taking on the topics, going after what the politicians really mean, and making it all clear. For your freedom and your liberty. Liberty Nation with Tim Donner.
Impeachment is in the air. Democrats just have to figure out exactly how to do it. Welcome back into Liberty Nation Radio, a production of LibertyNation.com and heard from coast to coast on the Radio America Network. Now that the impending Mueller report appears to be coming up empty on Russian collusion with Trump and the Michael Cohen show hearing produced nothing new, Democrats have turned their attention to Trump's finances, obstruction of justice, corruption. And they're not giving up on Russia either. We'll discuss the Democrats kicking their impeachment plans into high gear, how impeachment is a matter of when, not if. Plus, as the national debt skyrockets past $22 trillion, LibertyNation.com economics correspondent Andrew Moran jumps on board to discuss how we can tame that beast, or if at this point there's virtually no way out. And with leftist demonization of the police, prominent philanthropist Abby Moffat joins us to talk about what the private sector is doing to address an alarming drop in the number of aspiring cops around the nation and other notable trends in private philanthropy.
Say what? Say what? Say what? One more time.
We kick things off with our signature segment, Say What, where we roll out some of the most wacky, astonishing, and damnable things uttered by politicians and the chattering class. We start with climate change hysteria and the sense of hopelessness it's engendered in young people and old people alike. Last week, we played you a clip of school-age kids verbally assaulting California Senator Dianne Feinstein with demands for immediate action on the Green New Deal, which would turn over control of not just the energy industry, but the entire economy to the federal government. This week, the hysteria was encapsulated by older people. We've got a couple of women on a BBC show in Britain who said they're so paralyzed with fear over climate change that they've joined the so-called birth strike movement and refuse to have children.
I'm terrified, and that's putting it mildly. So our planet is in a kind of collapse. The natural world is collapsing around us, and that's actually happening right now. And I'm so disappointed by the response by our authorities to this crisis, and so freaked out by it. Everything that I've read, that I've basically last year I came to the decision that I couldn't bring a child into that.
I mean, each day for me is a struggle. I really do. I'm so depressed. I feel so hopeless. And my decision for being on birth strike mostly has come from not wanting to pass that fear on to someone else. If we're in this situation now, even since my parents had me, we've destroyed 60% of life on this planet.
And that, my friends, is the kind of fear stoked by climate change alarmists that is leading young people to say, to hell with the economy, which would be bankrupted by the Green New Deal. We must take radical action right now. Consequences be damned. Now, just as that clip revealed everything you need to know about the misery of climate change alarmism, there's another clip here which tells you everything you need to know about the cultural chasm in this country. Hillary did that with her basket of deplorables comment, and left-wing elitist darling Bill Maher did the same thing on his HBO show this week, comparing coastal elites to flyover folk.
They turn on the TV and all the shows take place in a few hip cities. There's no Real Housewives of Toledo or CSI Lubbock. There are no red carpets in Wyoming, and no one ever asks you, who are you wearing? Because the answer is always Target. There are two Americas, and it seems like one is where all the cool jobs are, where people drive Teslas and eat artisanal ice cream. We have orchestras and theater districts and world-class shopping. We have Chef Wolfgang Puck. They have Chef Boyardee.
Evidently, Mr. Maher and his leftist elitist cohorts still haven't learned the lesson of why they got beat by Trump. It was exactly that attitude. From the outrageous, we take you to the amusing. By most counts, Hillary Clinton had enumerated about 24 or so reasons why she lost to Donald Trump, none of which include her. But this week it became 24 or so and one. This time, Hillary made a speech in Alabama and blamed her infamous loss of the blue state of Wisconsin, where she never campaigned, on termination of the Voting Rights Act.
I was the first person who ran for president without the protection of the Voting Rights Act, and I will tell you it makes a really big difference. And it doesn't just make a difference in Alabama and Georgia. It made a difference in Wisconsin, where the best studies that have been done said somewhere between 40 and 80,000 people were turned away from the polls because of the color of their skin, because of their age.
Well, you got to give it to Hillary. She's been very creative in her invention of excuses for her unthinkable defeat at the hands of Donald Trump. She says she's not running again in 2020, to which Donald Trump tweeted, quote, "Oh, shucks, does that mean I won't get to run against her again? She will be sorely missed, exclamation point," unquote. But Hillary promised to stay out there on the stump making speeches, after which many a Republican responded, "You go, girl." But as Hillary and potential candidates Michael Bloomberg and Eric Holder checked out of the presidential race, a couple more Democrats checked in, bringing the field of presidential candidates trying to take down Trump to 14. John Hickenlooper, yes, that's actually his name, former governor of Colorado and a bit of a joker in the deck given his relative independence from the National Party, says he's running for the White House on the strength of his record as governor in the mile-high state and standing up to the bully-in-chief, Donald Trump.
No one can predict what happens after you become governor. A stark drought, thousands of acres in flames, and then came the worst floods in 100 years. And the mass shooting in a movie theater once again tore the heart out of our community. I promised Colorado families that we would rebuild our communities better than before. I'm John Hickenlooper. I'm running for president because we're facing a crisis that threatens everything we stand for. As a skinny kid with Coke bottle glasses and a funny last name, I've stood up to my fair share of bullies.
So that means he can stand up to Trump, I suppose. The other candidate who threw his hat into the ring this week was Washington State Governor Jay Inslee, who immediately engaged in that Democratic rite of passage, appearing on the liberal daytime chat-up show The View, vowing to be the climate change president.
We need a president who will say this: America is going to defeat climate change. It is our destiny, and we will do this. And I'm convinced of this. But To do this, we have to have a leader who will say fundamentally and unequivocally that this is the number one priority in the United States.
Now, looking at the latest Pew Research poll of the issues most important to the American people, this was conducted right after the State of the Union, climate change finished 17th. Climate change, 17th on the list of most important issues to Americans. Hickenlooper and Inslee are both white males, bringing to 3 the number of white men in the race, meaning 3 guys who fail to check any of the intersectional boxes. Not a woman, not black, not Hispanic, and insufficiently aggrieved, we feel certain. But I'll tell you who's still aggrieved: the governor and lieutenant governor and attorney general of Virginia, all Democrats. In the wake of blackface controversies involving 2 of them and sexual assault allegations against the third, they've all been called on to resign by fellow Democrats like Virginia Senator Mark Warner, but they're all still there. So Warner was asked a pretty obvious question on CNN about the blackface governor and the twice-accused sexual predator lieutenant governor and stumbled while trying to prevaricate.
They're both still in office, even though you've called for both of them to step down. How embarrassing is that for you as a Virginia Democrat?
There needs to be a due process where the accusers get a chance to make their case, where the lieutenant governor gets to make his defense.
But just yes or no, you still think they should both step down?
Listen, I think that we made our call weeks ago. Both of these gentlemen, if they're going to stay, there needs to be a process in place so they can go about trying to re-earn the faith of Virginians.
We made our call for them to resign, sort of, kind of, but they can go out and whatever. Virginia Republicans who control the state Senate have promised hearings in which the 2 women who've accused Lieutenant Governor Justin Fairfax of sexual assault can make public all the dirt which Democrats are trying desperately to sweep under the rug. Fairfax did the incredible recently on the floor of the Virginia Senate, comparing condemnation of him regarding those accusations by 2 black women to a lynching.
I've heard much about anti-lynching on the floor of this very Senate, where people were not given any due process whatsoever, and we rue that. We talk about hundreds, at least 100 terror lynchings that have happened in the Commonwealth of Virginia under those very same auspices, and yet we stand here in a rush to judgment with nothing but accusations and no facts, and we decide that we are willing to do the same thing.
If in doubt, play the race card and make yourself, accused by 2 black women of sexual assault, into a victim. We'll take a quick break, then come back and discuss the skyrocketing national debt, $22 trillion, and what we can do about it.
Liberty Nation with Tim Donner.
Exhausted by all the fake news? On LibertyNation.com's YouTube channel, facts and fresh, bold analysis are what you get without the leftist spin. Subscribe today to the LibertyNation.com YouTube channel, because truth
is making a
comeback.
We believe that all men are entitled to blessings of liberty.
This is Liberty Nation with Tim Donner.
Nero fiddles while Rome burns. That about sums up the state of fiscal responsibility, or lack thereof, of the people we elect these days, as they run up annual federal budget deficits of between $500 billion and $1 trillion, and the national debt has ballooned to a staggering $22 trillion, with millions more added to the debt every day. What's the end game on this national debt? How exactly will it affect the American people? And how close are we to a tipping point? Joining us to analyze this under-the-radar crisis is LibertyNation.com economics correspondent Andrew Moran. And Andrew, after the Revolutionary War, way back when, and facing massive deficits, Alexander Hamilton said the only way to repair the deficit was to grow our way out of it, and they did grow out of it. We've seen economic growth these days doubling since Trump took office. Can we grow our way out of this debt crisis?
Well, I think one thing that we saw with the historic Republican tax code was that, pro-business legislation can grow the economy. Corporations are boosting compensation packages. The U.S. economy is averaging about, 200,000 new jobs a month and hourly wages that are at all-time high. So it is true that these tools might be exhausted with the recent economic data, but I don't think anyone can dismiss the power of this type of these types of bills, whether it's tax cuts or less regulation. The problem, however, is that when the economy grows, the government also grows, and that's the main issue with the debt, is that the economy could bring in about $20 trillion of revenues, but the government would still find a way to spend $23 trillion. So rather than cutting and spending or shrinking the size of government, administrations, whether they're Republican or Democrat, they always agree to increase it. And this is, you see it throughout every administration. It happened with Reagan. Reagan is viewed as this great fiscal conservative icon. It's true, he slashed taxes and regulations and he boosted the economy. But spending was actually 3% higher than the 40-year average at the time. And the country went deeper into debt by, I think it was, $2 trillion by the end of his 8 years.
Now, as we talk about a frightening national debt, 22 trillion and growing by the day, that's 22 with 12 zeros after it. What areas in particular will suffer as a result of this out of control national debt?
I think you should have your razor blades in order because everything will be affected. America's finances are atrocious right now. You have $200 trillion in unfunded liabilities and expenditures. You have Medicare and Social Security on the brink of insolvency. Interest payments are soon going to top $1 trillion. And then the Treasury, they recently announced that they're borrowing $1 trillion for the second consecutive year to fund all of this deficit finance spending. Politicians seem to think that the debt going up $1 trillion a year is feasible, but it never lasts forever, and it can't last forever. You see this every time in the debt ceiling debate. Both sides grandstand, and in the end of it, the Republicans and Democrats, they just throw their hands up in the air and agree to raising the debt once again. So there's only so much tax. There's only so much money you can tax, borrow, and then of course only so much money you can print. No matter how much the MMT or the modern monetary theorists believe that you can print infinitely as long as you fund some progressive cause du jour. But perhaps maybe I have too much faith in the intellect of politicians, but it is inevitable that the government has to make tough choices, even if it means losing an election. They'll have to either reform entitlements, or they'll have to take an axe to the budget, or God forbid, they have to be honest with the electorate and say, we can't afford this, these great times anymore. So that's the optimistic scenario. And I think the other bad option is you either inflate the money supply and devalue the currency in half, or you just admit to the world, hey, we're bankrupt.
Well, what's the tipping point on this debt, Andrew? Many economists have said when the national debt reaches about 25 trillion, we'll really be up against it and at a point of no return. Do you agree with that?
Well, I think the 25 trillion is an arbitrary figure because I think the U.S. government has already passed the tipping point. I remember during the financial crisis, there was a gentleman by the name of David Walker. He was the former Comptroller General of the United States, and he sounded the alarm about all this spending and debt. And his prediction was that eventually the U.S. will only be able to afford paying the interest on the debt and perhaps some entitlements, and that's it. And that's a pretty haunting prognostication, and that's a quite likely scenario. Once Social Security folds, then that's the domino effect of everything else within governments. You won't be able to afford anything anymore. And then the Federal Reserve raising interest rates. The U.S. government can only be thankful that the rate hikes were paused.
Well, that about sums it up, doesn't it? Thank you, Andrew.
Thank you.
Andrew Moran, economics correspondent for LibertyNation.com. Quick break, and then we're back with impeachment fever in the swamp.
Liberty Nation with Tim Donner.
Far more important than my political future and far more important than yours, the well-being of our country.
This is Liberty Nation with Tim Donner.
Well, it's becoming crystal clear that the Democrats have interpreted their partial victory in the 2018 midterm elections as a license to promote openly socialist policies. But it will soon become equally clear that they also believe their mandate includes unending investigations of President Trump and, dare we say, The I word, impeachment. On what basis, you say? Well, they can figure that out later. With Russian collusion apparently failing to materialize in the Robert Mueller investigation and the Michael Cohen show hearing in the rearview mirror, the Democrats have now sent forth dramatically revised talking points. Here they are. The special counsel probe is too narrow. It doesn't cover enough about obstruction of justice and financial crimes. So it is the duty of us congressional Democrats to carry on with many more investigations. Yes, they believe that Mueller and his nakedly partisan team, consisting almost entirely of politically active Democrats who've donated to Hillary Clinton and or Barack Obama, and that has investigated Trump for almost 2 years and was once their lifeline but is now looking like a major disappointment, has not uncovered the damning evidence on Trump they so dearly desired. So, damn it, they'll go out and find what they want by themselves. And thus they have turned their lonely eyes to a fishing expedition aimed at no less than 81 individuals associated with Trump, from administration officials to members of his own family. Those document demands went out this week. In addition to providing a surfeit of riches in talking points for their 2020 presidential candidates, they appear convinced that their hunt under every rock will produce enough dirt to justify articles of impeachment, even with the certainty that it will not result in Trump's removal from office. That would require 67 votes in the Senate, and that is not going to happen. To the matter of why so much of Cohen's testimony was in closed hearings, former House Intelligence Committee Chair Devin Nunes says it's not hard to figure out.
This is why they don't want him outside. They want him behind closed doors so that we can't talk about the testimony. The bottom line is that Cohen was great for Republicans. It was great for Donald Trump because we now know that the dossier was total bunk. There was no truth to it.
Indeed, Cohen provided nothing new except for the fact that the whole Russia-Trump dossier was based on Cohen going to Prague for an illicit meeting with a Russian agent, which he testified did not happen, that he's never even been to the Czech Republic. And thus, Republican Congressman Jim Jordan said the Democrats didn't lay a glove on Trump.
Michael Cohen is going to prison in 2 months for 4 distinct federal crimes, one of which is lying to Congress, and yet the Democrats made him their star witness, their first announced witness of the 116th Congress. What I know is what the president's done is 2 years as president of the United States. Taxes reduced, regulations reduced, economy growing at an unbelievable rate, lowest unemployment in 50 years. Gorsuch and Kavanaugh on the court. We're out of the Iran deal, embassies in Jerusalem, hostages home from North Korea, and oh, by the way, there's a new NAFTA agreement coming, just to name a few things. So that's what I tend to focus on, is the amazing record we've seen under the leadership of President Trump. And you guys want to talk about a lawyer that worked for him for 10 years, that came in and told all kinds of lies.
And so the Democrats and the elite media will continue to deflect attention from Trump's record and the socialist ravings of their upstart progressive members of Congress with investigations of everything about Trump and everyone surrounding him, trolling for anything they can find to kick off impeachment proceedings. Head of the House Judiciary Committee, Gerald Nadler, made it clear that Democrats are getting ready for impeachment and that it's just a matter of when, not if.
Impeachment is a long way down the road. We don't have the facts yet, but we're going to initiate proper investigations. We are going to initiate investigations into abuses of power, into corruption, and into obstruction of justice.
Indeed, the Democrats are playing every angle. Adam Schiff, head of the House Intelligence Committee, is still focused on Russia and a project to build a Trump Tower in Moscow, which never even came to fruition.
We are certainly looking deep into the set of issues around Moscow Trump Tower. We're also looking at persistent allegations that the Russians have been laundering money through the Trump Organization. I don't know that that's true, but if it is, again, it's a profound compromise of this president.
So there it is again. If it's true, So they just throw out allegations knowing the leftist media will dutifully repeat them whether true or not. That's their tactic. If it's true, gives them a chance to talk about the most scurrilous of allegations, regardless of whether they're true or not. Then there's the far-left Congressman Jim Jeffries, who's also focusing on Russia.
You can start Exhibit A being the termination of James Comey, who at the time was presiding over a national security investigation into whether Russian spies cooperated with the Trump campaign to sell out our democracy, interfere with the election, and artificially place Donald Trump in the presidency.
And let's not leave Maxine Mad Max Waters out of the equation. She's been out to get Trump impeached from before he even took office on whatever she can think of.
I have been looking at this president before he was inaugurated, and I came out early talking about impeachment because I knew all about Manafort and Flynn and Sater. And so whether we're talking about collusion or obstruction of justice, we're talking about finances, we're talking about the foundation, this really needs to be investigated and explored.
If all these remarks do not represent a foregone conclusion about impeachment, nothing does. So the plan will apparently be to prepare articles of impeachment and then backfill the specific reasons for it. This in America. It may be that the Democrats' increasingly radical base is demanding impeachment for any reason or no reason, or the party may simply still be hell-bent on revenge for an unthinkable defeat in 2016 to a man they revile with every fiber of their being, or they may actually believe this is what the voters want. Now, on the risk-reward scale of this kind of strategy, it would appear the downside risk of impeachment at any cost easily outweighs the upside reward. After all, the American people knew exactly what they were getting in Trump. He survived the Access Hollywood tape, for heaven's sake, not to mention countless vicious personal attacks from the left. And yet 62 million voters obviously didn't care about that. They knew they were not voting for Pope. Trump could, as he famously said, fire a shot down Fifth Avenue in New York and not lose a single vote among his base. Conversely, he could walk on water, and the Trump haters would likely respond that it just proves he can't even swim. It's the mass of citizens in neither camp who will decide the 2020 election, and if Mueller's report turns out to be the dud the Democrats are evidently expecting it to be, just how much more of the left's bottomless cup of hatred for Trump will the voters be willing to countenance? Democrats seem to forget or ignore that the midterms hardly represented a wave election. Their victories in the House were accompanied by losses in the Senate. In the lower chamber, in the House, where over 90% of incumbents get elected every 2 years, the Democrats got a gift with the abandonment of seats by 40 GOP House members seeking higher office or retiring. Almost half of those seats were subsequently captured by Democrats. And then there's the clear historical pattern of new presidents suffering losses in their first midterms, more than 30 House seats on average. But the Democrats are evidently convinced that their mandate is for socialist policies and shop-till-you-drop investigations of Trump. Good luck with that. With leftists demonizing the police, there's an alarming shortage of new cops wanting to go into the business. We'll come back to discuss private efforts to try and reverse that growing problem.
Liberty Nation with Tim Donner.
Exhausted by all the fake news? On LibertyNation.com's YouTube channel, facts and fresh, bold analysis are what you get without the leftist spin. Subscribe today to the LibertyNation.com YouTube channel because
truth is making a comeback.
As much as we hear about trillions of dollars of government funding for various national priorities, it's the nonprofit sector which has led the way in so many movements and policies, both conservative and liberal, over the years. Major philanthropists like leftists George Soros and Tom Steyer and the libertarian Koch brothers provide millions of dollars in funding for organizations which set the pace for entire movements, while enormous organizations like the Ford Foundation can sometimes single-handedly bankroll the development of all manner of policy prescriptions which impact or even define ultimate government policy. Joining us to discuss major trends in giving and philanthropy and one initiative regarding the police in particular is Abby Moffat, CEO of one of those major foundations, the Diana Davis Spencer Foundation, founder and chair of the Daniel Morgan Graduate School of National Security, trustee at the largest think tank in America, the Heritage Foundation, and the Media Research Center, among other things. Abby, welcome to Liberty Nation Radio.
Thank you so much, Tim. I'm delighted to join you.
Well, I really appreciate it. Now, Abby, 10 years or so ago, we were seeing the start of a global financial crisis, which led to a big drop in funding to and from the nonprofit sector. Has the charitable sector continued to struggle, or has it largely rebounded since the Great Recession?
In many ways, it's rebounded, but it's also the smaller nonprofits are still struggling because a lot of the well-known bigger nonprofits get a majority of the funding. So the smaller, particularly in the investigative research area, the smaller nonprofits are really struggling.
Well, as CEO of the Spencer Foundation, your focus is largely on funding programs on national security and education and entrepreneurship and public policy. You've been a major player in the nonprofit and foundation sector for a long time. I'm interested in your thinking about effective philanthropy and how your philanthropic philosophy has evolved over the years.
Well, when I first started out in the foundation world, it was a very different. It was more mom and pop. It wasn't as regulated an industry as it is now. Times are changing. It's also because technology has grown and we're able to use technology more effectively to make our grant making really, with less money, being able to be very effective. So technology's played a big role in how we've evolved and the whole industry's evolved.
Now, starting with the shooting in Ferguson, Missouri 5 years ago, which was blown up into something which turned out to be completely untrue, the left has increasingly demonized the police, leading to an increasingly skeptical attitude about cops across the nation and an alarming decrease in the number of people who want to become cops. A really good example of how to affect public attitudes is your foundation's partnership with an organization called Code 3, which brings local police into the classroom to talk with kids and a bunch of other things. I noticed that since you started funding the program, the kids' attitudes towards the police had improved by a lot. What's the key to success for programs like this?
Well, it's actually improved by 60% because the police really befriend the students and the kids. And we have numerous examples of kids that didn't want to be involved with the police, thought they were evil people, and now are friends. And in a couple of cases, we know of students that were involved in gangs and have now left the gangs and want to become police officers, because they're not only friends with them, they play sports with them. They really develop a bond. And the kids' responses have been tremendous. They are so excited. And they also take them on trips, field trips, where they get to see the countryside. Many of them have never left their 1 mile radius, and they haven't had opportunities to do other things in the city or experience the countryside. And they've made a difference. Code 3 is the organization that we actually started from scratch. We saw a need based on Ferguson and other issues that there really needed to be support for the police and how to encourage the police in the communities. You know, when we were growing up, Tim, it was community policemen, policewomen also, were friends. You know, we would know Mr. Jones, or police officer Jones. But nowadays it's different. So we're trying to get back to that community policing where it's much more of a partnership between the police and the community.
Well, now you mentioned that your foundation actually started the Code 3 organization. And I think a lot of people believe that what foundations, charitable, philanthropic foundations like yours do is simply fund existing organizations. But in fact, just the Spencer Foundation alone, which is a major player in the philanthropy movement, has started a number of organizations itself, yes?
Yes, we have started a number of organizations, and that's really based on the original funder of the foundation. The original foundation was Shelby Cullum Davis, and he himself was an entrepreneur and believed in starting things or be in on the ground floor as he was with Heritage Foundation. He was one of the first donors to give $1 million to Heritage Foundation, and we all know it's the leading think tank, and it's just been written up by University of Pennsylvania as being one of the best think tanks in the world.
Well, it's also the largest in America and possibly the largest in the world. Now, what is your philosophy about funding big national organizations like Heritage Foundation as opposed to locally focused ones like Code 3?
Well, we believe in doing both because if you don't change policy, you can't have groups like Code 3. Policy affects everything and everyone. So Heritage Foundation plays a vital role in helping these small nonprofits as well as helping communities all over the United States as well as all over the world. So it's a hand-in-glove approach. You need both. And we like to support both big organizations as well as small ones because there's a niche for everyone, and Heritage changing policy changes opportunities for Code 3.
Okay, so let's close this up with a sort of a 30,000-foot view of philanthropy from your standpoint, from someone who's been involved in this for so many years. What areas do you think will be the most impacted by philanthropy over the coming years?
Well, I really believe public policy and particularly immigration. This is the leading issue that we are dealing with at Heritage Foundation as well as other places, because immigration affects our national security, it affects our education, it affects our public policy. And I really believe patriotism needs to be an issue, and building the patriotic belief system to encourage everyone to believe in America and to make America great. And so we are doing a program called Why America, starting with fifth graders at 50 charter schools in Washington, D.C., where we're teaching them about what's great about America. And they're learning about George Washington, not from a textbook, but from an actor who pretends to be George Washington. That's just one example of many that we are involved in. And that's another project that we started from scratch.
Well, on that powerful note, Abby, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you, Tim.
Abby Moffat, CEO of the Diana Davis Spencer Foundation. This program, Liberty Nation Radio and LibertyNation.com's own podcast, The Uprising, and our newest entry in the podcast field, Politics and Prose, The Rabbit Hole, are available to you on demand at LibertyNation.com and from fine podcast providers everywhere. So that is it for this week, but we'll be back at you next week. Same time, same station. Till then, this is Tim Donner saying, stand up for liberty. And we'll see you next time on Liberty Nation Radio.